It's quite sad to see that the reputation of Marvel's television shows, namely the ones on Disney Plus, have not received the best reputation. Oh sure, WandaVision certainly had a good start before an anticlimactic finish. The Falcon and Winter Soldier did receive some positive feedback. That series left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth in the long term, mainly due to how preachy it was, and, in light of Black Panther Wakanda Forever, how hypocritical the message was. Whilst other shows have received some good attention, being mediocre at best, like with the Hawkeye series, and some other series like What If, involving some fun speculative fiction on what could have happened with the MCU, overall, these recent television shows have not received the best reputation. Then again, even back during its Netflix days, some of the shows there were not of peak quality either. Then you have the exception. I remember my friend Evan Prince told me one time that I want to celebrate the exceptional, celebrate what is good about entertainment. And you know what? In light of what he said, let's do that. Prior to watching Netflix's DareDevil series, many of you and myself would have been familiar with the late 2000s Ben Affleck Daredevil movie, which is not the best quality movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it does have its campy, over-the-top charm.
I'm not the bad guy.
I'm not a killer.
I'm not.
I'm not. I'm a brooder. I am.
Brooding.
Yes! Every early 2000s superhero has a moment where he has to stare into the distance to think.
He scared a kid because he was beating up a bad guy. How does that make him question himself?
We don't need a reason. We just need to brood.
Bullseye.
Can I adopt you?
Bullseye, eh? Anyway, needless to say, when Netflix decided to adapt the Daredevil series, and said series is also said to be a part of the MCU, and keep in mind, this show was made back when the MCU was at its peak, by the way, expectations were reasonably high, and the casting choice was certainly interesting. You got Charlie Cox, who back then was known for playing such roles as the main lead in the Stardust movie, as well as the main lead in the Stone of Destiny movie. He was set to play the titular character of Matthew Murdock, aka Daredevil. And there were a few other notable casting choices, but it was all just a matter of execution. And honestly, I would happily rank Netflix's Daredevil up there with Batman the Animated Series. It's so good. But what is Daredevil all about? What is it about this particular superhero series that stands out with the likes of the Spectacular Spider-Man and Batman the Animated Series? I'll tell you. The premise of Daredevil is set in a fictional location in New York City called Hell's Kitchen. Yeah, you already know it's going to be riddled with crime with a name like that. Our main character is a blind lawyer named Matthew Murdock, who is also the son of a champion boxer. By day, he is a lawyer who got himself involved with a chemical spillage accident that caused immense damage to his eyes at a young age, and has a strong sense of justice by daylight. But by night, he dons on the masked vigilante persona of Daredevil to do what the Hell's Kitchen government cannot do. You see, even though Matthew Murdock is blind, the chemicals have physically enhanced his bodily hearing capacities. So he's able to sense movements on a whole different scale. And because his hearing is so acute, he's able to fight crime in an impeccable manner, using echolocation and other techniques such as his sort of vision, which he describes as seeing a world on fire. Something that plays a heavy emphasis in this particular show, mainly due in fact to the source material, is that Matthew Murdock, aka Daredevil, is a passionate Catholic. Which begs the question, why is someone professing some kind of Christian faith dressing up as the very symbol of what he opposes? Questions like that would certainly run through a lot of people's minds, but what's so genius about the first few episodes of the first season, and the first season as a whole, is that it actually describes why someone like Matthew Murdock would dress up as a devil to go and fight crime. Right at the first episode, he makes a confession to his local Catholic priest about how he goes out to beat up crime. He asks the priest for forgiveness for what he's about to do, and the priest says, that's not how it works.
Another man's evil does not make you good.
Matthew Murdock even confesses that even though he's doing the right thing to stop criminals by beating them up, he admits that there's some part of him that's letting his own inner devil out. So there's some kind of psychological language, some kind of psychological confession going on, which is something kind of akin to Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment in a way. Through that and other brilliant, brilliant character writing that remains consistent throughout the show, it makes perfect sense as to why someone like Matthew Murdock would dress up as a devil of all things. The show does a great job with maintaining the character writing. Typically, with a lot of superhero shows or action flicks in general, people are just tolerating the monologue and dialogue scenes just enough because, just give me the action, give me the action, give me the power fantasy. But thankfully, with Daredevil, the scenes where people are just talking are just as engaging, if not more engaging, than the action itself, because there's a lot of clash in regards to ideologies and philosophies clashing together, as well as people trying to maintain power dynamics, people trying to find out certain answers to certain mysteries, people trying to resolve certain relationships, people trying to reconcile with one another. It's constantly keeping you engaged, and there's never a dull moment. This series is so visceral with its action. Yes, it is set in the MCU where there are people with elaborate superpowers, and certainly in real life there are people with real life superpowers too. So with Daredevil, you get someone in a much more grounded setting who definitely earns his reputation as a relatable protagonist character. Modern Hollywood these days seems to struggle with making a relatable character, mainly because they're more focused on propaganda pieces than actual human beings with relatable goals. Thankfully, Matthew Murdock is a character who is very much relatable. In fact, very much akin to other greatly written protagonists like, say, Deku from My Hero Academia, or Thorfinn from Vinland Saga, and Guts from Berserk, and Frodo Baggins, and all those greatly written protagonists. He has his own set of obstacles to overcome, physical, mental, and spiritual. This series does not take it easy on Matthew Murdock. This is a brutal series, and he is pushed to the limit. Right in the second episode of Daredevil, poor Matthew Murdock nearly dies of a collapsed lung had it not been for the interference of the Rosario Dawson nurse. Wow, this series pulls no punches, for lack of a better term. In the second season, he goes through a philosophical clash with the character Punisher, which makes for some brilliant back and forth dialogue between Daredevil and Punisher in regards to moral talks, in regards to conversations about morality and whether people deserve to live or die, whether they deserve a second chance or whether it's too late for them and they need to be killed. These kind of dialogues keep the show engaging, and it encourages really deep conversations that people ought to be having. And by the third season, I've been informed that the Marvel's Defenders show was meant to be set between Daredevil Season 2 and Daredevil Season 3, which would explain why Matthew Murdock is in the predicament that he is at the start of Season 3. But honestly, Season 3, it does such a great job of explaining just enough and having faith in its audience to put the pieces together and get a rough idea on Matthew Murdock's state of mind that you don't actually need to watch the Marvel Defenders show in order to enjoy the quality of the third season of Daredevil. You get the idea. Matthew Murdock is down in the dumps. He's at his worst possible state. He's going through a spiritual crisis akin to the Book of Job. He still believes in God, but he's having quite a fallout with them due to a personal crisis he's been having in regards to his attempt to fight off crime and what's been happening to him personally and his process of trying to heal. The struggle that Matthew Murdock goes on is even more emphasized during the action scenes, especially the ones where they're drawn out and you see Matthew Murdock and the opponents he's facing getting very exhausted through each swing, through each dodge. You just feel exhausted just watching it. It just makes the whole thing that much more engaging. I mean, how many superhero movies and TV shows do you watch where people go through the action motions and they get exhausted. You don't often see that. So seeing that kind of thing makes Matthew Murdock that much more of a spiritual and the enduring hero, which makes you want to root for him. There is this incredibly choreographed prison scene where the take was akin to like 1917, and it lasted for like 11 minutes long with no cuts and just all this elaborate action and acting, and it's just so incredible to see. And it's inspiring to see Matthew Murdock eventually rise up and still be that spiritually motivated hero, despite his spiritual crisis and faith in season 3, despite the philosophical clash he has in season 2, despite his underdog beginnings in season 1, and all the other characters just add so much variety to it. They're much like Batman the Animated Series. The series does a great job at portraying the villains in such a sympathetic light. Now, some of you might think that the main villain of season 1, Wilson Fisk, may come across as somewhat weak in season 1, but you can definitely sense his growth as a character by season 3. Wilson Fisk was already a threat enough in season 1, but in season 3, Wilson Fisk is much more of a predominant threat. The villains here are brilliant. Wilson Fisk, all throughout season 1 and season 3, is methodical. He's intelligent, and that's much more emphasized through the way the actor portraying him pronounces his lines.
The lone man thinks he can make a difference.
You are not going to harm the woman I love. Like, he's just got that sort of deep, methodical kind of speaking, which gets you into that kind of mindset. It's so brilliant. You get the Punisher by season 2, who offers a bit more variety in regards to the kind of antagonists that Matthew Murdock comes across. And Punisher challenges Daredevil on an ideological level, whilst also maintaining a lot of the same kind of abilities that Daredevil has, being someone who used to be in the army, which makes for quite the opposition for Daredevil. There's also a few other villains thrown in the mix. This anti-heroine figure in Elektra, who is a lot more of a femme fatale than her counterpart in the Ben Affleck movie. You get the on and off mentor figure that is Stick, who is very cynical and is implied to be using his cynicism as a means to justify his morally questionable actions. In season 3, you have an unexpected villain in Poindexter, who is a brilliantly reimagined version of Bullseye. You'll remember the over-the-top portrayal by Colin Firth in the late 2000s movie, but with Poindexter, you get this person who starts off as seemingly just some other soldier extra, but he starts standing out on his own, and Wilson Fisk does some investigating on him, and as it turns out, he's this poor soul suffering from some kind of obsessive-compulsive disorder, and is having these perfectionistic standards in regards to the position that he's in. It makes for a genuinely creepy, but also fairly tragic villain, and yeah, all these villains are just brilliantly written, and I haven't even gone into the other more friendly relationships that Matthew Murdock has. All of his friends, whether it be through his job as a lawyer or the people at the church or the nun who helps him recover by season 3, his colleagues at work, all of them provide something meaningful. There's not a single character that I'd say is a waste of time. Honestly, this entire show is just great. If there were some flaws I would point out with the overall presentation is that by season 3, there's a scene where Daredevil is in some secret basement, but he's finding out that there's going to be a ruthless attack at this one other location. It seems to be happening in the span of like mere minutes or so. And we cut to the next scene, the villain attacked, and then boom, Daredevil appears, seemingly by super speed. Now, this is quite questionable, as the way to get there would have been quite elaborate, even if this particular location was right next door to where Daredevil was at. That kind of time cut could be a wee bit questionable, and also there is an after credit scene in the 3rd season, which was meant to be expanding to more content. Good news and bad news, that continuity will carry over to Daredevil Born Again, but the bad news is that it's under the ownership of Disney Plus, and I've got a bad feeling about how it's going to be presented.
I got a bad feeling about this.
Given these characters' treatments in the likes of Echo and She-Hulk. The less said about She-Hulk, the better. So, overall, I would highly endorse the Daredevil series in its original run through seasons 1 to 3. You're going to get a lot of great insight on it. There's some great symbolism in there, with Matthew Murdock being some kind of Christ figure in several scenes. So many philosophical clashes. I give Daredevil an 11 out of 12. It is a fantastic show. Whilst there are some things that don't quite wrap up loose ends, it does tie up enough loose ends to make for a satisfying narrative. And I suppose the sense of a need for continuity does play into its comic booky nature as an adaptation. So, what do you all think of Netflix's Daredevil? Let me know in the comments down below. And this is a review I've been intending to do for some time, and I'm so glad to finally got the chance to watch it. If you haven't seen Daredevil, I would recommend getting the Daredevil series on physical Blu-ray copies if possible.
I'm just trying to make my city a better place.
And just spread the word around about some great, exceptional shows. What do you think about Daredevil? Let me know in the comments down below. In the meantime, ScotsThinker signing out.